You signed a contract, and the other side aren't performing their side of the deal. What now? Do you suspend, terminate, or just hope for the best? Knowing your rights can make the difference between cutting your losses or making them worse. I'm Mike, founder of Starlit Contracts, where we help you to negotiate and use contracts with confidence. We're looking at termination clauses in this video. To summarize, a termination clause enables a party to bring their contract to an end earlier than was planned. This is different to a suspension. If you suspend a contract, then you can restart it once the reason for the suspension has been overcome. If you're terminating the contract, then you can't restart it. A contract can be terminated in different ways. First, a party might have the right to terminate for convenience. Second, they may terminate when the other party defaults on a key obligation. And third, the parties may jointly agree to terminate. Is this something you should care about? Well, absolutely. It's important to know when you and the other contract party can end your deal early, and what happens next. You might remember this practical example from our video on suspension, because of course, suspension and termination rights are closely connected. If you've not seen that video on suspension yet, then check it out. Now to the example. Good Supplier Limited enters into a contract with Bad Customer Limited. Several invoices are long overdue and it's impacting badly on Supplier's cash flow. Despite this, customer insists that Supplier continue their work. What could go right for the supplier in this situation? Let's say they anticipated this problem and included a right to suspend in case of non-payment and to terminate when 3 or more invoices are overdue. Supplier suspends the contract, but customer still doesn't make payment. In a last attempt to try and continue the deal, supplier issues a final warning that requires payment by a fixed date, otherwise supplier will terminate. Customer takes the threat seriously and makes payment. What can go wrong for the supplier? Well, let's say that they don't have a contractual right to suspend or terminate. This means that the supplier must rely on any non-contractual rights that may apply under applicable law, unless they can agree something different with the customer. This situation raises multiple questions. Does the supplier have a non-contractual right that can help them? Should the supplier file a claim? In this case, the supplier sticks with the contract. It turns out that the customer's in financial distress and can't make payment. The supplier loses money on the deal. Let's look at some sample clauses and key considerations. And first, to the clause. Neither party may terminate for convenience. This sentence makes the intentions of the parties clear, but in some cases, depending on the law that governs the contract, you won't need it. If you're unsure what position applies, and you don't want either party to have the right to terminate for convenience, then include it. Let's look at a sample clause with a different approach. Customer may terminate for convenience, then you insert when termination is possible by providing supplier with, then you insert a time frame for advance written notice. Customer will pay supplier promptly for all work performed in accordance with the agreement up to the date of termination, and a compensatory payment of whatever value or calculation you choose. In some deals it's reasonable for a customer to terminate at any time, and to pay little or no compensation. This can be the case in some maintenance services contracts when the supplier incurs little or no costs due to the termination. In contrast, termination after a supplier has performed most of their obligations could require a large payment. Let's look at a sample clause that allows a party to terminate after a period of suspension. Customer or supplier or either party may terminate immediately by providing written notice if the supplier or customer or other party does not resolve the cause for suspension of the agreement within. Then you insert a time period of the date of suspension, or the customer or supplier or either party is in severe financial distress. The key point here is to determine when termination is possible, both in terms of timing and the trigger events. I've seen clauses that allow termination when the other party is liable for gross negligence, for willful misconduct, and for breaches of an important performance obligation. Let's continue with the sample clause. When customer or supplier or either party terminates for default, then customer will pay supplier promptly for all work performed in accordance with the agreement and a compensatory payment of whatever value or calculation you choose. Now keep in mind that when there's a termination for default, the compensation will often be less than when there's a termination for convenience. So consider if and how to change compensatory payments depending on whether there's any wrongdoing by the non-terminating party. Let me recap the most important points from this video. First, termination is final, while suspension is temporary. When you terminate a contract, it's over. You can't restart it. Second, termination can happen in three main ways: for convenience, for default, or by agreement. Third, having the right to terminate a contract for default can be sufficient to persuade the other party to take action. Finally, compensation amounts tend to vary based on who's at fault. If you're ready to take your next step to negotiate and use contracts with confidence, then visit us at starlitcontracts.com, where you can access more content, participate in interactive sessions, and be part of our community.